This is the Shiftheads podcast with Shane Hewitt and friends.
Welcome to the Shiftheads podcast. I'm Shane Hewitt. I found a tweet that I wanted to share with you, but I didn't understand it because it's all kinds of numbers and smart things. So I call my smart friend. Sylvain Charlebois is here. And so Dalhousie Agri Food Lab is where he works. And in fact, your Twitter is on here, Sylvain. It says Dal Agri Food, comparing some numbers with Stats Canada. And you know me well enough to know that when I see discrepancies like this, I go, wait a second, what is going on? Now you guys look at the numbers. So I thought maybe we could bat this ball around a little bit.
Because you understand what it actually means.
Well,
really.
it means more than the numbers.
Absolutely.
If I'm reading this right, and I don't want to get political, but sometimes we have to. And so what did you guys publish? A few days ago, you guys published Stats Can pricing numbers, changes in food prices from January. What was that?
Yeah. So typically every month, third Tuesday of the month, they release the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. In that index, of course, there's food, but they don't release their list of products. So there's 77 products until 2 weeks after. And that's what happened basically this week. So we saw the price of bananas, the price of cabbage, the price of strawberries, the price of beef, and all the cuts. And so they go more into the specifics in terms of what is costing more or less. And so that's when you get a better sense of the kind of data they're working with. Because the CPI will tell you, well, bananas are up 10, 15%, but they don't necessarily give you a price.
Right.
Now, 2 weeks after, they give you a price. So we can actually look at our pricing, what we have in our database, and compare what they have with what we have. And so basically, randomly, we went through the list and we basically focused on a few. And some of them actually, they were the same as us. There were no difference, but in many cases there were significant differences between what Statistics Canada is posting versus what we have in our database.
So when we look at this, I mean, a couple of quick hits here. These are basically benchmark items. These are sort of, as you talk about peanut butter as being the sort of the center of the grocery store, beef, chicken, bananas, the basics, right? Milk, butter. And but how is it possible that your prices in some of these cases are drastically different, like the price of milk, from what Stats Canada has? Do you guys go out and just go to the grocery stores? Do you call it? Do they send you the data? How does that work?
We basically have market feelers and market collectors. So we have a network of academics, basically exactly. And then we basically check specific price points. That's basically what we're doing. And January was really the first month we were able to do it because we're starting to accumulate a lot of data. And so we just looked at January. So StatsCan released a list of products with prices in January versus December. So we looked at differences. And then we did the same thing from January 1st to January 31st. What happened? And that's when we saw some major differences. Now, I think really the bottom line is that they have access to different data, a different data set, essentially. And I've always argued that I actually think that Statistics Canada is in good faith. But I've always believed that access to data is a problem for them.
Yeah, well, I would say that's the case. So then let's look at the stream of that data then. So either the grocery is submitting data to them. Are they going out and seeking it from the shelf like you are? Do we know that?
Well, so when you get your products scanned at the grocery store, that data is captured and sent over to Statistics Canada. That is what Statistics Canada explains to the Canadian public. Now, there are a few things that Statistics Canada is saying that we don't know for sure it's happening. So that's what they're saying. Is that really what's happening? We don't know. They're saying that they have a relationship with a couple of grocers. We don't know which they are. They're not allowed to disclose. And the other thing, of course, is shrinkflation. I mean, they claim that they take into consideration shrinkflation, but do they really? And when we look at our own data, We don't see any evidence of that. So again, we do. And of course, we have our own data. We know what we're measuring, but Statistics Canada never discloses the data that they actually are using to come up with the CPI and everything else, which is unfortunate. I do think right now in 2024, we should start thinking about open data for governments, especially when it comes to the CPI.
Well, and okay, cost per unit, right?
The consumer price index.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah. Thank you. I was going cost per unit on the shelf is what we see
on the shelf. Yeah. Oh, yes, exactly. Right? 100 grams. 100 milliliters,
right? Like you go to buy apples and then you have your price of $3.50 per pound, but then you go to the scale and the scale's in kilograms, and then you have to do your 2.2 and do all the math so you can get a price of how many apples. And then if you've got shrinkflation, well, you've got your old jar of peanut butter was 400 grams, but your new jar of peanut butter is 350 grams. They're not submitting a cost per gram, which would be at least a benchmark or a median price. Now, I don't know your world like you do. But is it because you guys have access to this army of PhD candidates that can go out and get more diverse data that
we can get to real prices? And of course, there's lots of distortion in the market, like promotions, loss leaders, and things like that. So we cut through all that noise to get to actual real pricing. So, I mean, it boils down to methodology. Now, Statistics Canada has its own methodology, but I do wonder whether or not they're as transparent as they should be, because it is a federal agency and we need to know where these numbers are coming from. And of course, we've talked about this before. The CPI is a major factor when it comes to many of the programs we have in Canada to support a lot of the people who do need support from governments across the country, whether it's welfare programs, subsidies and things like that. But a CPI is a really big component when it comes to providing support to different folks. So I'm a bit concerned about all of that stuff. And I do think that at some point, Statistics Canada will have to embrace the concept of open data way more. And this is a concept we actually see in other countries. Other countries tend to be a little bit more open to what kind of data they're actually using.
Well, again, it's a Canadian thing that they want our information from the scanner to go to them, but then they're not willing to really give that information back to us. And that's a Canadian problem. Now, I just want to say here, I would love to say there's a conspiracy or bias with the government. I would, but in most cases that, your accuracy in the data is more favorable to our pricing than what the government says, with the exception of milk. And then I even thought, those dairy people.
Oh my goodness.
I wanted to blame the dairy people, but then actually your numbers are actually more favorable for butter and margarine, and milk is the only one that's wildly offside. So
it's it. So if you think that perhaps, let's say, for example, for argument's sake, that people are thinking that the inflation rate is underestimated. So we can't say that for sure, because they are, I mean, sometimes our numbers is way lower than StatsCan's, and sometimes it's actually higher. So I don't believe there's any room for conspiracy theorists, to be honest. I'm not in that camp. I'm in the science camp. That's all I'm doing. I'm just looking at methodology here.
I'm the one who gets to interpret and make up.
Well, it's your show, not mine.
Well, this is interesting, though. I mean, like the milk was, you're talking a discrepancy of 5.5% almost. And I mean, that's wide. But at the same time, it wasn't so wide in other ones too. And apples were in our favor of being cheaper. So, it is pretty well balanced in, I guess, the difference. So that part is good news, as much as I would love to pin it on some sort of government bias or government influence, but it seems to be not the case.
Yeah, and in some cases we got the exact same thing. So I didn't bother posting anything, but I wanted to post a balance report. It's not really a report. It's just basically we just posted some information on X.
Again, you'd have 3 Twitter followers. Our numbers were the same as StatsCan, 0 difference. Tweet. That's boring.
I did put the handle of StatsCan, and sometimes they do respond, sometimes they don't. They did not respond this time around, which I thought was very interesting. But typically they do respond, but they didn't respond to this one.
Sylvain Charlebois with Dalhousie University. Now, the big question of the day, Sylvain, because you always know there's one. You have like 17 children. So when you go to the grocery store, when you've been recently, he doesn't have 17 children, but the number gets bigger every time we talk. What was
called inflation?
Childflation. Oh my God.
Childflation. Yeah.
Kids are getting bigger. So when you went to the grocery store, what was one item that you bought that really surprised you when you picked it up that maybe you didn't see in your data, just normal shopping? Was there something that surprised you? Because I have bananas for me in the cheap favor really surprised me. That's for sure.
Bananas is a non-story. It's been a non-story for years.
That's great.
I'd say, I mean, right now you may have noticed that yogurt is just unbelievably expensive. If you're a yogurt fan, you've noticed for sure. And of course, a lot of people didn't notice ungraded Mexican beef at the meat counter. And the reason, of course, is that I do believe that grocers didn't want to spook consumers. Like in 2014, when beef prices went up like 25% in a month with Canadian beef. Canadian beef is actually quite expensive, American beef as well. So grocers went south to get ungraded Mexican beef in Canada because they wanted to protect margins and they just didn't want to raise prices too much. So I often say, well, we're getting ungraded Mexican beef because we are good complainers. We like to complain about beef prices, and grocers were tired of hearing about it.
As long as they're not selling unfiltered bottled river water from Mexico, we're good.
No. But have you tried Mexican beef?
No, I don't think I have. Well, I did in Mexico. It was the only time I ever.
And it's not good. It's not very good.
No, I would say the texture is even different, which is probably not okay.
The texture, the freshness. I mean, my guess is that ungraded Mexican beef would come from older bulls or cows, and it shows. Yeah.
And it shows. Thank you so much for sharing the time.
Oh, yeah. Bon appetit, my friend.
The Shiftheads Podcast.